So I had the good fortune of being home free, otherwise is subletting houses in between locations, and I thought, well, I've lived in the East Bay my whole time in here, so I was like, why not try a place in the city? And I ended up living in a place just down the pathway, and I got to come running here every morning, and it was like my saving grace to see this ocean, which I never get to really experience living here. So I found this spot, and I was like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if I could like tell a story in this spot?
Cool is the word.
So thank you for helping me fulfill that fantasy. So this story begins in a dream. I was dreaming, and the dream, I'm like standing like on a plank looking out of this bay, and there are these really big tall mountains all covered in snow, and my mom's there, and she says, Leah, today you're gonna marry a polar bear. And it's a dream. So I go along with it, and like my only hesitation, to be honest, was that I had been really looking forward to marriage because I figured I'd get to have a lot of sex, and I was thinking that having sex with a polar bear could get complicated. So I just wasn't that excited to get married for that reason, but I was like, it's okay, it's a dream, I'm just gonna go with it. And I start like walking down the plank to, you know, where we're gonna get married, and there's these people that are my friends that are like standing on the edges of the town, and I thought for sure they'd come to my marriage, but apparently they just think it's too weird. It's too weird for them that I'm actually going to get married to a polar bear. And so I'm like, oh wow, I'm about to lose my friends. And I'm getting a little bit bummed out, and I'm walking down this plank, and I'm like, fuck, I got so screwed. You know, it's like, and all of a sudden I feel this tap on my shoulder, and I turn around, and it's this woman, and it turns out that it's the polar bear, who turns out his name's Paul, so it's Paul the polar bear's mother. And she's not a polar bear, by the way, she's a woman. And she says, hey, look, I know this is weird, and I just want you to know that the way this happened was that I gave birth to Paul, and his body didn't work. His heart literally just wasn't strong enough, and I would look into his eyes, and I saw my boy, the child that I had created, and I saw how desperately he wanted to live, and I couldn't believe that I hadn't created a body that was strong enough for him. And I went to the doctors, and they said there was nothing I could do, and I was sitting there watching this life that I had created die in front of my eyes, and I was watching a National Geographic channel on the channel one day, and I saw this special on the polar bears, and I saw how strong they were, like fiercely inside and outside strong. And I figured maybe if my Paul could just have a little bit of what they had, then he could live. And so I went to the polar bears, and I told them my story, and they thought it was rather unusual, and that it had been a very long time since people had come to them and asked them for their that. And they gave it to him. They gave it to him. But he also became a polar bear, and that's how he lives. But she said, I just want you to look at him and know that there is a man in there. And I was like, all right. So we get married, and we go get on this boat. And we get on this boat. I'm sorry, it's just so hard telling a story with people talking back there. Hey guys, can you keep it down? Thank you. I know it's kind of rude, but it's so hard telling the story with people talking in the background. I'm so easily distracted. So anyway, so we get on the boat, and it's like this little yacht, and Paul's been like wanting to go on this like honeymoon forever, and we go out, and we're leaving the bay, and I realized that for the very first time in my entire life, I'm about to leave the bay. I'd never been out into the open ocean before. And I actually don't have words for what it felt like, but it sounded like this. And so I'm out in the open ocean, feeling these waves beneath the boat that I've never been able to feel before. And I've got my hands on the railing of this boat, and Paul comes over and stands next to me and puts his paws on the railing. And he's just like this big, white, furry thing with big black claws. And like his paws, like they kind of like fall over the whole railing next to my little hands. And he's like, "You're not little." And I'm like, I could have sworn I just heard him talk. Because it's not like his mouth's moving, by the way. And he's like, "No, you just heard me. I said, you're not little." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Look, I mean, I've been living in this town for as long as you've been living in this town, and I've been watching everybody, and I chose you. You're the one that I wanted to be with, because you're not little." I kind of scratched my head on that one. And I looked up into his eyes, and for the first time, I saw... And I had to look up, just so you know. He's a lot taller than I am. He did not have eyes of a polar bear. He had the eyes of a man. And he looked down at me. He's like, "Look, I know this is totally weird, marrying a polar bear. And I guess I just wanted... I knew that if I just went and asked you, there's no way that you could do it. And so I went through this whole thing with our moms. But look, just spend this time with me, get to know me. And when we get back, if you don't want to hang out with me anymore, you don't have to be married to me. We can just, whatever." And I was like, "All right, okay." So we talk. And I realized that, he knows how to talk to me in a way that, no one's ever talked to me before. We talk about ideas, and he listens to me, and I listen to him, and I see the world differently, and my heart starts to, do something around him that it had never done before. And it turns out that he's quite capable in bed, and that was not an issue. And so we had this fantastic honeymoon. We would go out. He had this thing where he'd go to jump on the iceberg. He jumped from iceberg to iceberg, and then he did this thing only on gray days like this. He'd punch a hole in the ice, and then he'd cover his nose so that no one could see it, and he'd blend in with the top, and then he could jump and get the fish that way. And totally cool. And on our way back, I'm just realizing that, I can't imagine life without him. And he wasn't Paul the polar bear anymore. He was Paul. He was my Paul. And so we get back, and we decided to make a life together, and we figured out that I was really good with numbers, so I became a banker, and he had the fishing thing down, so he went down and worked with the fishermen. And life was good. Some of my friends came around, and after they got over the initial questions, how do you guys have sex, it all just kind of normaled out a little bit, and life was really good. It was kind of easy in a way that I didn't know that life could be easy. And then one day things started to change. Paul started getting really anxious. He started kind of pacing around the house. And when we'd go swimming, he would start swimming, and he'd start going out, out to the open ocean. I had to get in one of the boats one day and bring him back. And so then we started having him just do swimming in the pool, because he said he had this thing where he just had to swim, and he would swim so many laps that we actually had to work out a deal with the pool people that he would only come at night, because it scared all the other people during the daytime, because he was swimming so kind of like ferociously. And he stopped eating then, and I started just like looking all around the internet trying to figure out what could possibly be going on. And that's when I learned about that there were all these polar bears that were dying, and that they were drowning, and that it was just like not working out so well for them. And I told Paul, and he was still so anxious, and he started roaring and got really angry. Eventually got fired by the Fisher people because he broke some necks by accident, and that's when I started getting really lonely, to be honest, because he stopped talking to me. I mean, we definitely stopped having sex way before the last part, and we just stopped being friends, and I just kept coming home and just kind of like waiting, and I didn't even know what I was waiting for at some point. I just felt like something. And finally, in this kind of desperate moment, I just went back. I went to the polar bears, and I went to them, and I said, "Look, something is not right with Paul, and I need your help." And that they were not gone over for that, and they were like, "Look, we're having a hard time right now ourselves." And I was like, "Well, what can I do? Like, can I like sign a petition?" And they were like, "Well, I mean, if that makes you feel better." And I was like, "Well, can I like I stop driving my car?" And they were like, yeah, people have been telling us that they've been doing that." And I was like, "Well, surely there's got to be something that I can do." And they're like, "Well, and so I left. I got in my boat and I started going back. And then I heard this voice behind me. And I was just getting like out of range, and it was a polar bear, and he was yelling something, and he was yelling. He's like, "Don't worry, he's a way shower." And like I tried to turn back to hear, but the waves were getting big, and so I knew that I had to leave right then. And I'm like, "A way shower? What the heck's a way shower? I don't know what a way shower is." And so I go back and I try to tell Paul, but I mean, what do I have to tell Paul, right? There's nothing I can tell Paul. Like, what the fuck is a waist shower, and like, so we just continue this kind of like anxious thing of waiting for what I don't know. Is what it felt like. And I'm at work one day, and I hear him. And he says, "Come home now." And so I go home, and as I'm coming up the steps of my house, I see these clumps of white fur. And then as I'm coming into the house, I see his toenails. And as I go through the living room, I'm seeing blood. And as I'm going up and outside of our room, I see an ear, and I walk in, and there's this like empty carcass of polar bear on my floor, and there's all this blood, and there's this guy laying on my bed, and I'm like, what the fuck did he do? Was it too much? Did he aggravate somebody? Did they come over and did they kill him? And I'm looking at that, my Paul is dead, and you know when someone dies and like everything gets all silent inside, it's like butterfly flapping, like everything and nothing all at once, and all I could think of was that if this guy killed Paul, then fine, he can kill me too, because I don't want to live in this world without Paul. And the guy gets off my bed, and he's naked, by the way, all covered in blood, so like I think I might have this psycho killer in my bedroom. And I'm really just not caring, and I'm not moving. I'm just there, like the air is there. And he comes over to me, and he puts his hands on my shoulders. And it felt familiar. It felt so familiar that I was like, that's how Paul put his paws on my shoulders. And then I could smell him, and he smelled like Paul. And when I looked up into his eyes, it wasn't the eyes that I'd always known. It was the eyes of a polar bear. But this was my Paul. And then I understood what that polar bear running down that iceberg had been trying to tell me when he said that Paul was a way shower. Sometimes I guess polar bears speak backwards. Paul was here to show me the way. Good story. Oh, thank you. He is my polar bear. 2 weeks after I met him, I've told this story before, and I texted one of my best friends, and I was like, I figured it out. She's like, what? I was like, he's Paul the polar bear. And she's like, totally.